everyone. This is the sixth episode of the podcast Geofinance. Today we are going to talk with you about the unemployment, the numbers that are arriving from the United States, from Canada, from Europe, and other regions are a little bit worrying. So we are going to try to explain the situation. Hello, Ivan. I hope
Hi,
you're fine and well.
I am.
That's nice to know. Could we discuss this very, very important topic and what awaits us?
Well, the numbers that we're seeing from the US are very worrying indeed. We saw uh, last week it was 6.5 million new unemployment claims, jobless claims. The week before that, it was a similar number, 6.6 million. The week before that, it was 3.3 million. So it's uh, it's very worrying because so far, I mean, we have 16, 17 million people newly unemployed in the United States, and this is definitely going to adversely affect any recovery that we might see.
Why do you think that? Isn't that a good thing? In short term, people can be like retrained or better positioned when everything is over.
I actually support the possibility for companies to fire employees that they can't support in a situation like this. But the problem with unemployment is twofold. First of all, government will intervene. Governments all over the world will help those unemployed, will provide benefits to those unemployed, will provide money, helicopter money to those unemployed. And that means that they will have no reason really to go back to work. Because if you receive benefits, if you receive money from the government, why would you work? And secondly, I fear that a rising unemployment rate will lead to a reduction in the consumption rate, which will further damage the economy. Because right now, if you have employees, if you have people working, if you have people making money, you have um, you have demands for goods, for services, for products. But if everyone is unemployed and the government subsidizes those people, but they're not going to buy cars and big ticket items, they're not going to buy real estate, they will never qualify for a mortgage. If they're receiving unemployment benefits, no bank will give them a loan. So there will be a big cut down, there will be a big reduction in the number of people buying those big ticket items, cars, etc. And more people will be buying food. More people will be buying staples. More people will be buying just the basic products that they need to survive. They will not be buying anything even remotely luxurious, even remotely discretionary. So it will be a difficult recovery.
This sounds pretty much like some kind of vicious circle. Uh, Let us take a look at the people and institutions that actually have the funds and have the money. We are mentioning things that people will decrease their consumption, that goods that are not necessity will be heavily inflicted in terms of consumption. But can you anticipate the modified behavior of entities that actually have the money in this time?
Well, what entities have the money in this time? That's a big question because we've seen already insurance companies, for example, refusing to pay out insurance because even to claimants who have pandemic insurance, they're saying, "Oh, but this is not one of the pandemics on the list." Right? So
Okay.
they will find any reason not to pay insurance. And so not many institutions have money these days. Not many organizations have any significant funds. The only organizations that do have funds are central banks because they create those funds out of nothing, and that will do more damage than good to the economy.
Mm-hmm. So you think that we are going to suffer not only from the severe decrease in consumption, but also in the investment?
And
And
not only that, there will be a lot of, for example, speaking of mortgages, we have moratoriums on mortgages in many countries now. which means that people can defer payment. People can not pay
Uh,
mortgages for a few months, or they can be exempt from paying rent for 2 months. Actually, they can defer rent for a few months, but they cannot be kicked out. But over time, that will lead to millions of properties, maybe tens of millions of properties, being foreclosed on because people won't have enough money to pay to keep paying the mortgage. So it will be a very much a downward trend in the economy in the years to come.
okay, so gross domestic product will be seriously decreased in almost every country, in almost every region, if not every. So you are mentioning that the government spending and the incentives that the government trying to provide will not yield the results that they expect, that something else will come on the way of this, and that this is not a responsible policy. So what's the solution? To leave it as it is? I mean, to leave the system to repair itself? To rely on
Uh,
people to retrain them, or is there any particular systemic solution in this case?
well, government is to blame for this, not the pandemic. The pandemic is a natural occurrence, but government is to blame for the leverage, for the indebtedness, for all of the cheap money that they have printed. Not just the U.S. government, governments all over the world have printed so much cheap money, and companies have so many debts that it's virtually impossible for them to pay it off. And so the solution for this is the same as the problem. Like it's like trying to quit taking drugs by taking more drugs. That's their solution, and that makes absolutely no sense. You can't tax your way out of poverty. You can't print your way out of a crisis. That's not how it works. The only real solution is for government to actually be reduced in size, to reduce regulations, to make it easier for businesses to hire and fire people, to make it easier for the bad cycles to shorten. So, for example, if we have an expansion that lasts for 6 to 8 years, we're definitely going to have a recession, but the recession can last for 3 years, or it can last for 1 year, or it can last for 10 years. And the amount of time depends actually on the government, because the more government tries to intervene, the longer it will take. And yes, there will be short-term pain if the government just lets everything run its course. There will be a lot of short-term pain, but overall, within a few years, there would be a real recovery. A real recovery meaning that over-leveraged businesses would fail, banks would fail, businesses that are inefficient would fail, and who would survive? The most efficient, the best businesses, the best banks, people who had reserves, people who were prudent, they will survive, and they will take over the assets of these failed companies and create a new economy which is not over leveraged.
But it sounds like a brand new system.
It is.
Are
That's
we
the only
ready
way.
for a brand new system?
No one is ever ready for something like this, but it has to be done. That's the problem, is that in their desire, politicians in their desire to be reelected, in their desire to be popular, they are effectively making it very difficult to get out of the crisis in 10 years, 20 years time, because they want to be reelected now. And they are putting our grandchildren, our great grandchildren into a lot of debt, into a horrible situation, because they want to be elected next year or this year. And we're already seeing we are the grandchildren of people who have been bamboozled decades ago into the same policies, the same things. Because this didn't start now. This started in the 80s, in the early 80s. After Paul Volcker, interest rates started to go down, way down, and they stayed down. We haven't seen interest rates above 6-7% in 40 years almost. And that's the problem. Cheap money is the problem, because if you're a bank, if you're a company, you can get as much cheap money as you want. Why would you ever repay it? Like, you can just, you owe a lot of money, you just borrow more money to pay off your debts.
And you
And
roll on your debt
yeah, and
into
the
indefinite
government does the
future.
same. The government does the same. But at some point chickens come home to roost. At some point you have to pay back the money. And then what? There's really only two ways for governments, especially the US government, to get out of this pickle, because this is a very big problem. The sovereign debt crisis especially. They can either inflate, out of the problem, hyperinflate. In hyperinflating, they will destroy the dollar, obviously, or they can return to a sound monetary policy and default on a lot of the debts. And that would
Um,
mean that we would have to go back to a gold standard or something similar because it's impossible. Like nobody trusts a government that can print any amount of money. Would you lend money to a government like that? If there's a 10%, 20% inflation year after year, would you lend your money to the government?
well,
Of
certainly
course not.
not.
Of course not. Or would you even keep your money in cash or in liquid form? Of course not, because it's losing value, right? So you would invest it in ways that hedge against inflation, and that will take money out of the economy and into these hedges. So this type of system is horrible, economically horrible.
Do you think that the return to gold standard or any kind of standard with tangible metal, so to speak, is possible now in the era of different technologies, in different attitudes? Is it possible to roll back the time from fiat standard back to gold standard?
It's possible. Everything's possible. But the problem with the gold standard is not the gold standard itself. The problem with the gold standard is that government likes to promise people something for nothing and to give people something for nothing.
Isn't that the job
Governments,
of every government?
politicians, no, no, no. But 100 years
I'm
ago, they
joking a
couldn't.
bit.
100 years ago, they couldn't do that. Now they do that all the time because since the 1930s, the world hasn't really been on a real. Well, since the 70s, it hasn't been on any kind of gold standard. But since the 1930s, it hasn't been on a real gold standard where you can just exchange your paper money for actual physical gold. And that's the problem with the gold standard because politicians in a democratic system will promise things, and to deliver those things, they will need money, and they will have to resort to printing if they want to keep their promises and get reelected. So the gold standard would be very difficult for a big government. So we would
Hmm.
have to go to a very small, very limited government. The type of government that we had 120 years ago. That's really the only way for a government for a gold system to work, or silver-based system. Doesn't matter. I mean, gold and silver have been used together in most cases. The world went on an exclusively gold standard only in the 19th century when the UK was the first country that introduced a real gold standard because most of their silver had gone to China before that because the Chinese did not want to trade. That's the Opium Wars. That's how that came about because the British wanted to sell something to China, but the Chinese didn't really want any of the British goods, and they were selling a lot of stuff to the British. So they engaged in opium wars. So they would sell the opium that they grow in India in the British Raj to China to get some of the silver back. But when that didn't work, they went on a true gold standard. So a gold standard is possible. A silver standard is possible. Any kind of a hard asset standard is possible, especially with today's technology, because now we can have digital currency backed by gold or backed by silver. You don't have to transact in actual physical gold or silver or platinum or palladium or anything, oil. It doesn't matter. So a system based on a tangible asset is possible. However, it's not attractive to governments because a government that uses of a country that uses a gold standard or a silver standard would have to dramatically be reduced in size.
Yes, this is a bit difficult. I mean, it sounds very, very promising. It sounds also a bit interesting because it has some parallels with historical developments. However, switching to something that is highly tangible, so to speak, and presenting it as a both political and also monetary anchor sounds highly challenging. But okay, maybe it is not impossible. In short period of time, it is highly improbable.
It is
Mm,
unlikely, not just in a short period of time, because governments over the past 100 years or more have become incredibly large. And they have a lot of power over everything. Everything we do in our lives depends in some way on the
and
government.
yes,
Regulations, various government bodies, they interfere in our lives all the time. And no matter what product you buy, it has to conform to some government regulation. There's a
sup-
government body
sup-
behind
sup-
it.
supposedly, yes, after this crisis, it might be even more expanded in terms of the power of the government over the people.
Exactly. So in that sense, no government will willingly give up power. No person, I mean, most people don't really want to give up power if they can't. I mean, why would they? And governments even more, because it's politicians. Politicians, most of them are not really all that competent, and if they were, I mean, they would be working in industry, they would be making more money there. They don't have the skills to do a real job, so that's really the only thing they can do. And if a tangible asset standard is introduced, that would mean power is given back to the people. They can't have that because then they are unemployed.
Okay, then we are getting back again to the initial topic of our discussion. Everything that been mentioned so far is, as I said, very interesting, and also it gives certain food for thought. However, rolling a bit back on our topic, what to do with all those unemployed people? What to do with them?
Again, the answer is government. Government,
Okay.
government moving back. Government letting people start their own businesses. So business licenses, all of the regulations. If the government just pulls back, if the government lets people work, they will find work. My worry is that there will be in the United States, for example, I think there will be at least 50 million unemployed by the end of this crisis.
It sounds tremendous.
It is. And the problem is a lot of those people will also become unemployable after spending a few years on government benefits, because why would you work if you can just, sit back, smoke weed, play Xbox? After a few years of that, who will hire you and why would you even want to work? I mean, you see that you can live like that. Why would you work? Why would you try hard? So that's a big problem. If government intervenes, if government creates money out of nothing to give to these people, first of all, it will destroy these people's future prospects for employment. And secondly, it will also not help the economy at all, because these people might become these
Obsolete.
all of these, not just obsolete, but many of these unemployed people, they might become useful if you don't give them benefits, if you don't give them any money. They might become useful. They might start their own businesses. If the government just takes a step back and lets, for example, you have a truck, you want to start, maybe you start a delivery service. You're good with your hands. Maybe you become a plumber or an electrician or a mechanic, or maybe you
Yes.
become a sculptor or something, something along those lines. Many people have skills, have talents that they're not using now. And especially in the trades, many people can do a lot of work. There's always a need for work. Also in agriculture, I mean, farmers are complaining that nobody wants to work in agriculture. They import, labor from Central America in the United States. In Europe, they import labor from Africa, from the Middle East. Nobody wants to work on a farm. Nobody wants to, So if there is no government assistance to those people, they'll be forced to do something. And this may be one of the avenues for them to do something.
Okay. Interesting. So, I think that in this episode we managed to cover some interesting aspects of both unemployment and return to possible gold, silver, or any kind of hard, tangible asset standard that would provide different functioning of a completely different system. So the next topic, I think that we might cover something about the big data, the artificial intelligence, and new technologies that might come useful in this case during this crisis and during the crisis that looms. So even I would like to thank you for your very inspirative thoughts today, and I hope that we are going to deliver the next episode soon.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you all for listening, and see you very soon. Goodbye. Thank you once again. Bye bye.
Bye.